Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to my Guest List Pod, the little show with a big goal to spread the word about interesting and entertaining podcasts and their equally interesting hosts. I'm Darren, and I'm happy to say that this episode is the first of the interview episodes of Season 3. Just a quick reminder, if you would like to get in touch with me, you can find me at My Guest List Pod pretty much everywhere you look, and especially at myguestlistpod.com. Now, if you're just listening in for the first time this season, this is how the show works. Each episode, I invite a guest podcaster onto the show, and we count down a list in a topic of their choosing. Along the way, we take breaks and ask them some questions to delve a little deeper into their world and get to know them and their work a little better. As you will see from this season, some of my guests had a slightly unorthodox take on their countdown, which ended up being an unexpected but welcome wrinkle in my format. And if you stick with me, you will hear that I have been fortunate to speak with a lot of interesting podcasters in putting together this season. But I couldn't think of a better way to start the season off than with the guest I have for you today. Joe Pardavila is a broadcasting veteran with a wealth of life experience, and yet he's genuine, humble, and self-effacing. Joe and I had done a show earlier this year, but it had some technical issues, so I asked Joe if he would be interested and have the time to redo our chat. Thankfully, Joe agreed, and we have the show I'm presenting to you today. What Joe didn't know was that I was still in the midst of a migraine hangover when we chatted, and I had to struggle to focus, but there was no way I was going to cancel after Joe had been so gracious as to give me another chance to speak with him. I think Joe also knew I was a little off and took control of the show and was the consummate professional and an amazing guest that carried the discussion, for which I'm eternally grateful. Amongst other titles Joe currently holds, he is the current host of the Forbes Books podcast and a published author. And while my first interview with him was a little broader in its scope of what Joe has done over the journey, his podcasting and his book are the main focus of today's discussion. So now that that's all out of the way, sit back, relax, lend me your ears, and enjoy my chat with, and the dulcet tones of, one Mr. Joe Pardavila.
Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and on this episode of the...
Today I'm both honoured and excited to have the chance to chat with an individual who has decades of broadcasting experience, so I'm hoping to get some tips from him. Joe Pardavila has produced over 10,000 hours of audio content in his radio and podcast career, as a producer and as on-air talent. In New York, he was a major player in the hottest and most competitive radio market in the world, and has been part of interviews with celebrities such as Taylor Swift, Russell Crowe, and Jennifer Aniston, just to name a few. Recently, Joe has added author to his list of achievements and has released his first book titled Good Listen, Creating Memorable Conversations in Business and Life, a book where he shares his wisdom on the lost art of listening and how it can have a positive impact on both our personal and professional lives. Joe, humbly, I welcome you onto my personal guest list and onto my Guest List Pod.
Thank you, Darren. What a wonderful introduction.
Thank you. I try. How have you been?
I've been good. How about you doing?
Good. Look, most people will not know, everyone will not know this except for you and me. We did actually do a show back in July, and due to some technical issues, we are doing it again. And the great thing about that is we get to talk about how your book's done. So, but first of all, and for everyone out there, why don't you let them know who Joe Pardavila is and a little bit of your backstory so we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I'm, like you mentioned in the amazing introduction that you did there, a lifelong radio person. So I kind of stumbled into a radio career. When I was a little kid growing up outside of New York City, I dreamed of becoming a show business star. I wanted to, my hero back in the day was David Letterman, who's a famous talk show host. So I had aspirations of being a TV star or doing something in the world of entertainment. But I wasn't all that talented and I wasn't all that smart. So I went to a state school in New Jersey and I fell in love with radio. I just loved the medium. It was, at that point in my life, was the lowest barrier of entry to get into kind of entertainment. The college radio station, basically, if you had a pulse, they let you on and have a show. So I started enjoying doing radio. And for some reason, I'm not very prescient when it comes to making decisions, but I had the idea that I should probably apply for an internship at a radio station in New York to see if I loved radio. It was one of those things where I knew what radio was about. I knew how to do it from being in the college realm, but I didn't know what it was like as a career. So I signed up for an internship in the sophomore year of my, I'm sorry, I should say the second year of college, because I know in Australia they don't go by freshman, sophomore, or anything like that.
Yeah.
But in the second year of my my college career, I applied for an internship at a radio station in New York called WPLJ. And WPLJ was a heritage station. It's been, or was, in New York for over 40 years, nearly 50 years, and was a rock station at one point. And by the time I joined it, it was like a pop top 40 station. And the only reason, Darren, I took this job was because it was located above one of the major traffic hubs in New York City. I was a scared little white kid from New Jersey suburbs who was afraid to go into Manhattan, but the radio station was located above this transit hub in Midtown Manhattan where I could take one train right into New York City from my home in New Jersey. And so because of that decision, I ended up spending the next 24 years of my life at this radio station. Starting as an intern, working my way up through the company, and then spending a couple decades on the morning show as executive producer and co-host. So yeah, it was a wonderful run, over 20 years on the radio there. And then in 2019, as many people know who are familiar with a radio, that it's hard to make money in the business. Now with podcasting and other options like YouTube and such, there just isn't as much money as there used to be in radio. And radio stations were trying to sell as many of the radio stations as they owned. And ours was sold to a Christian broadcasting company. And the Christian broadcasting company wanted nothing to do with our station. They just wanted our transmitter. So they went ahead and blew up the station. And they now broadcast Jesus Rock on our frequency of 95.5 in New York. So for folks who don't know what Jesus Rock is, it's basically like really bad, like Nickelback and Matchbox 20, but they say "Oh God" and "Amen" in every verse.
Easy on the Nickelback, mate. Easy.
Oh, I apologize. Oh no, I wasn't saying it's bad, but it's like that sounding like rock music.
Rock.
No, I'm not one of these people like, oh, Nickelback's the worst thing in the world. I'm not. I'm just saying it sounds like that kind of music, except with a Christian influence to it.
Yes.
Yes. And then from there, Darren, I pivoted full time into podcasting. I was dabbling in it during my days in radio, but started doing podcasting full time. And that's sort of how I stumbled into the book you were mentioning. I now work for a publishing company in Charleston, South Carolina, where we publish books for entrepreneurs. And they had just started a podcast division. And they hired me to sort of coach and consult all these folks who were being podcasters for the first time. And I came to realize that all of the skills, or soft skills as they're called now, that I had accumulated and sort of fine-tuned during my career in radio were skills that many people didn't have or weren't familiar with. And I just kind of took it for granted. Like the stuff I was doing, I was like, oh, okay, everyone knows how to do this. And it turns out, no, not everyone does. And when I had this idea of like, hey, could this possibly be a book? I went to the powers that be and I said, listen, not all the people that I'd love to sort of inform and educate about this can afford our services. What do you think if we did a book about this? And they said yes. And lo and behold, a few months later and almost a year later, I wrote and published the book. It's called Good Listen. It's available now worldwide in all your book retailers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
That's fantastic. And as I said, we actually recorded on the release date of your book, which was very exciting. But since then, it has been critically acclaimed. It was a number one new release on Amazon, which was, I'm sure you're very proud of how it's done.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, Darren, one thing is when you write a book, people always like, how's book sales? So one thing that you'll get to know about me, Darren, is I don't know or care much about money. So, for example, the clients I work with, they spend a lot of money to work with us. I don't want to know how much they spend. I don't want to know how much it costs to work with me. When I worked in radio, how much commercials cost. I prefer to stay in the sandbox. I've always had this sort of phobia about money and taking people's money. And I know entrepreneurs and the people I work with on a daily basis, their job is to excise money from people's wallets for their business. I can't work that way. I've always been the person of like, hey, listen, pay me to do my thing, and then the rest will work itself out. So every once in a while, someone will say, how many copies do your book sell? I'm like, I don't know, and I don't care. I don't want to know. Like if the book is out there for people to, if they want to learn about me and learn about being a podcaster or just being a better communicator, cool, go for it. And it's not that expensive. Like I would feel bad if it was more than $20 my book. I'd be like, please don't spend $20 on my book, but it's under $20 and you could do the audiobook or you could do the ebook, which is cheaper. So I'm not a big fan of taking away money from people. I just want to try to do the best I can to entertain them, hopefully make them feel good about themselves and make them better at communicating with others.
Well, look, it's a fantastic book. I have read it, obviously, and I think there's a lot in there for, for not just creators, but just people in general. I think we have lost that art of listening, and people are in conversations I see more and more, especially with younger people. They're waiting for someone to stop talking so they can start talking rather than listening to what the person's just said. So I think there's a lot in what you've got to say that in some ways, a lot of it's common sense and common courtesy. You expand on that and make it a little bit more of a technique that you can practice. We'll come to that when we talk about your book.
And Darren, as much as I like to shit on millennials and Gen Xers, and I'm sorry, millennials and Gen Z, this is a problem for a lot of people. It's, and like you said, it's common sense. I remember I hate to read reviews about myself, but I remember there was one review of the book somewhere in some site that said, oh, this is all very common sense, but it's probably good for younger people. I'm like, not really. Everyone has this problem. We're all guilty of it. I do it from time to time. And you're right. The idea of like people waiting for others to stop talking to then talk, that's what I'm trying to avoid with the book. And that's what I kind of do when I'm consulting folks who are doing podcasting. The idea of doing a podcast or having a conversation with someone is not waiting for just the other person to stop talking so then you can talk and show how smart you are. The idea of a conversation, whether it's a podcast or in real life, in business, or with a family member, it's listening and reacting to what that person has to say. A conversation or a podcast is like a wave. You just ride it. You can't control it. Just enjoy the ride. And that's one of the things I really emphasize with people I work with or people who read the book. It's like, listen, these things that happen, creating magic moments, creating really good audio content, it's not a monologue. It's not a one-way street. There's a monologue could be an audiobook. Like my Good Listen is available on audiobook if you care to listen to it. But most audio content, unless it's a narrative type podcast, like a true crime or something like that, those are one-way conversations. When it comes to having a conversation in a podcast, it's two-way. It's all about being able to bend and pull and have this sort of like it's like, I call it like an alchemy. It's like putting all this stuff in a stew and making something. That's what you're doing when you're either doing a podcast or just having a conversation with a person in IRL.
Yes, definitely. And one of the best examples of that alchemy, as you call it, I think would be your previous podcast that you did with Dr. Jana called The Science of Sex, which I've listened to. You play a slightly different...
You listen to that?
I listened to all the episodes, actually. I binged everything. So
wow. Okay.
So you play a very different role in that show compared to what you do with Forbes books in terms of what you do as the host. And with Dr. Zano, you were sort of like a co-host and you were like a bit of a color man explaining probably the more technical side of what she was talking about to the audience. But it was interesting to see a different side of your personality in that show compared to Forbes books. No less enjoyable to listen to, just a different side. Did you really enjoy doing that show with Dr. Zana?
Absolutely. And I will say I am always humbled when anyone says they listen to me about anything. So like I'm genuinely, when you said you listened to that show, I'm like, really? Like I've been doing this. I've been creating audio content, being on the radio for basically my entire adult life. And I'm still like overjoyed and ecstatic when someone says, hey, I heard that thing you did or listen to that thing. I'll never lose that. Like to me, the joy of like someone taking the time to listen to something I've done, I'll always be really humbled by it. So thank you for that. But when it comes to my role on The Science of Sex, what you're talking about with Dr. John, or what I do with Forbes books or anything else I do, one of the things that I've always been good at is adaptability. I've always been able to, and it's, God, it sounds really like egotistical to talk about it like this, but it's like one of the things I'm able to do is go with, in simpler terms, just go with the flow. And identify what my role is. So in my radio days back in terrestrial, I had different roles. So sometimes I was just a backline producer strictly. Sometimes I was a foil in a segment where I was sort of like playing the quote unquote dick in a scenario. Sometimes it would be just as a host. So when it came to The Science of Sex, and the way that show came about was I was doing my terrestrial radio gig, which like I mentioned, it was this pop station. I always like to joke that it's a soccer mom station. It was a station that moms could listen to in the car with their kids. So anything that was dirty-ish or sexual innuendo was done that would fly over kids' heads. So it was a lot of double entendres, a little playful. Yes. So when I started being interested in doing a podcast, Darren, I was like, I want to do a podcast, but I don't want to do what I'm already doing. That's what if you notice that, like, folks that come from other mediums, whether it's television or radio, and then do a podcast, they're basically doing a podcast version of whatever they used to do. Whether it was, if they were a TV star, they did a show about blank, they do a podcast about blank. Radio people, they were doing a terrestrial radio show about pop culture, then they do a podcast about, like, I did not want to do that. I want to do something that was completely different. And I jumped to the thing that was most unallowable, if that's a word, in radio, especially with the FCC regulations in New York, was sex. And so Dr. John and I had been connected on social media, and I approached her and I said to her, hey, listen, I want to do a sex podcast, but I don't want to do and this is something that's proliferated on the podcast sphere, is like people talking about their sex life and oversharing and stuff like that, which is, hey, listen, if that's what you enjoy doing, do you, but I just didn't want to do that kind of podcast. I want to do something that came fact-based, science-based podcast. But as you can tell, Darren, and people listening to my voice can tell, I'm not very bright or educated or have a PhD, but what I can do is help translate PhD speak into what regular people can understand. So I picture as the idea of like, hey, you're the sex scientist. We'll interview sex scientists, but I'll be there to sort of guide the conversation so people who don't have PhDs can enjoy our conversation. And as you probably saw from scrolling through the list of topics, they ran the gamut from how to get a PhD in threesomes to Snapchat sex and just all sorts. We did over nearly 60 episodes of like all different studies. And it was fascinating because to me, I learned. My big thing is when I do a podcast, Darren, and this is probably for you as well, when you're interviewing someone, having a conversation with someone on a podcast, the one thing I want to do is I want to be educated. I want to learn something because I feel like if I do that, I'm an avatar for the audience. If I'm learning something, the audience is learning something. And so that's what I did with the science of sex. And even though my role was certainly different from what I'm doing as sort of like just your run-of-the-mill podcast host on Forbes Books, it's still coming from the same place. It's still coming from I want to learn about this person or about what this person is doing. One of the things, Darren, when I transitioned from radio to podcasting, especially business podcasting now that I learned was I was interviewing, like you mentioned, I name drop celebrities all the time that I've interviewed, but I was interviewing people who like had just recorded an album or had a movie coming out. And then when I shifted over to do business podcasting, I almost felt a bit of what they call like imposter syndrome, because I was like, man, what the hell am I going to say to entrepreneurs, CEOs, people who have created million and billion dollar companies? What can I possibly ask them? And then as I started to get to go and doing it, Darren, I realized at the end of the day, they're just people that want to talk about themselves. And people love talking about themselves, no matter if they've just recorded an album or they have a new startup. And I thought it was going to be hard and I would have trouble doing it. But all of the skills that we've talked about, all the things I've learned about how to do a successful interview, I translated that into the business world, and it was just the same. And I just have as much fun talking to someone who has built an app as to someone who just put out a movie, because I'm curious. I'm curious about what these people do, how they did it, and why they did it. So it doesn't matter in what skin they're coming in, whether it's from a show business skin or a business acumen or something like that. It doesn't matter to me. It's all people are. You hate to say it, but we're all the same. We all have the same foibles and sort of needs and wants. And so I was able to transition pretty seamlessly from doing the pop culture stuff into doing sex stuff and then doing business stuff.
You can see that in the passion in both of the podcasts that I listened to. Obviously, you didn't want to do a show that was just titillation of talking about sex. There was obviously, you were very invested in making sure that a message got across and that you were doing something more than just, like I said, being taboo, talking about a taboo subject. And then with Forbes, I've really enjoyed you delving into the whys and hows of these very successful people and where their stories have come from. And you're fantastic at getting that story out of, there's one in particular, I think it was the Maclo whiskey the lady who was
Yes.
behind Bee Beauty and things like that. That was an amazing story. It was really good, and I really enjoyed that episode. And you were great in bringing that story out, and she was a great guest too. She seemed to have a huge personality. So
Yeah, I mean, I will say if there's one gift I have, Darren, is that I am overly and sometimes obnoxiously enthusiastic about talking and meeting other people. Like I'm the annoying guy who will know the server's name at the restaurant and use their name
Lovely.
during the conversation. I don't know where this comes from. My mother even says like, I don't know where this came from. It's just, I don't know. To me, and it's really cheesy, but I like to make people feel good about themselves. And I think people feel good about themselves when they're recognized. And I know that sounds oversimplistic and almost Pollyannish, but if you think about that sentence, what I just said, Darren, it's like when people feel good when they feel like they exist in this world. And I think that's the problem with this world. And I know Australia may not be as bad as the United States, but this over polarization of people staying in their camps and their silos. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't feel recognized. And I don't know. I think when you tell people that you want to know what they're thinking and ask them questions about themselves, some people may see it as nosy. My wife calls me nosy all the time, but I think to me, I do it selfishly because me wanting to know more information about these people makes them feel good. So it's all like this win-win. I'm nosy about them, but me being nosy makes them feel good about themselves.
How is that translated into some of the interviews that you've done? And has that always been a positive, or has there been some negative results from being nosy with some of the stars that you've spoken to, celebrities that you've spoken to?
Yeah, Darren, I will say, I mean, I never had someone say to me, oh, I can't answer that, or, I don't want to go there. So I think people recognize that I come from a good place. I think they get my vibe that I'm like, oh, this guy, he's just having fun. He just wants to talk. There are times, Darren, where I did a podcast today where I was interviewing this guy who works for a giant tech company that's a cloud-based tech company. So say what you will. And man, I don't know shit about cloud computing, Darren, but I was still able to talk to the guy for 45 minutes. Yep. And I was able to do that because I want to know about what this cloud computing company, about what this guy does. So, and I think that's my advice for people. I think I write about it in the book too, is like, if you create this environment where people are comfortable, I use the metaphor of like, we all have two sets of friends. We have the friend who asks you to get a drink from the fridge and the friend who just goes in the fridge and grabs your last beer. If you can create that environment in everywhere you go, whether it is a podcast, whether it's in your business life or whether it's in your family life or friend circle, if you can do that, there's nowhere you can go that will offend people or will create some sort of animosity or make people feel uncomfortable. If you can create that sort of environment, you can get pretty much anything out of anyone. And, you talked about the lost art of conversation earlier when you were doing the intro about, helping people communicate with each other. It's like, that's what's lost in this digital amnesia that we all live up with. The fact that you can't, a lot of the stuff that you do to create that environment, you can't do digitally. You could do a lot of things digitally, and I don't want to be one of these people like, oh man, texting has killed the way we communicate with one another. I love texting as well as anyone, but if you want to get something done or want to get an answer about something, the best way to do it is either person to person or worst case scenario over the phone.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm with you in terms of the fact that it is a lost art, and the COVID lockdowns that we had didn't help that. Even with Zoom and Skype and everything else that we were doing, there's a difference in terms of really being able to, I think, understand body cues and really get into what you mentioned before, the flow of a conversation. I'm hoping that your book will help a lot of people to get back on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, Darren, I don't think it's like we can't unring this bell. I think we're gonna get worse and worse at this. But like anything, I think the cream rises to the top. The people that are able to communicate a message, the people that are able to listen to other people, the people who are able to be curious about others, those are the people that are going to succeed. So if you feel like you want to succeed in any way, in any part of your life, whether it's at work or home, what have you, if you're able to take these steps of being a better communicator, you will make your life so much better. And so, Darren, not everybody has to do this. And I'm not saying they should, but the folks that do, those are the ones that are going to succeed and live a happy and fulfilled life because they're taking these steps and being intentional about wanting to communicate with other people. We don't have to do it with everybody. Don't get me wrong. I love a good text as well as anybody. If I have a question to ask someone, a text is a great thing. But when there's nuance to be had, you can't do that in any kind of digital form. None works, whether it's social, texting, email. You cannot do it. There's nuance is pretty much nil in any of those type of mediums. To create nuance, to have it, you've got to do it in person.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. And, our interview at the moment is a perfect example because of the way I've got my setup in my room. I'm not even looking straight at you, which normally would be very, very rude. But it's just unfortunately...
I know I'm not that handsome, Darren, and you don't want to look at me. I get it. I'm grotesque. I totally get it. Yeah. I mean, I will say that to Darren about the idea of eye contact. I don't know. Maybe I'm just finally attuned. I almost don't always need it. Like sometimes most of the times when I record podcasts, Darren, I use an audio only platform. So I never even look at people. And to me, it's sort of like Daredevil. He's the blind superhero and he's got this super attuned like sense of smell and sound. Definitely. To me, I can pick up on cues just by sound. So, and I think that's just from me of being in my profession of being able to identify sounds and tones and any kind of like, anything, any of that kind of intangible stuff that comes through,
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's honed over years and years of interviewing and years of listening.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
Definitely. Great. Look, I do want to ask you about something else that it was a little remiss of me to leave it out last time, but you were in a huge market for radio in New York. And
the biggest.
Obviously, yeah, exactly right. And you were there. I looked at some of the, the years and things like that, and you were there in a crossover with the people like Howard Stern, and I wasn't sure Opie and Anthony as well, and all at the same time. What was that like? And did you actually have any interaction with the other radio stations? Or
yeah, well, Darren, I will say, especially working in morning radio, it's a very tribal lifestyle. So. Okay. The idea of fraternizing with other radio people was very slim. And I will say once social media came around, I think more and more people started following each other and communicating that way. Like I have friends in competing radio stations that I became friends with because of social media. But the tribal lifestyle of radio was basically like it's us against the world. So I met a lot of those folks that you mentioned and know of them. And it's just one of those things where it's like, especially for our morning radio. So to give you an idea of how it was, I would wake up at 3:06 every morning. And I set my alarm for 3:06 because I thought waking up at 3 o'clock was just ridiculous. So I set my alarm for 3:06. And then I would spend the next couple of hours researching, going through media, newspaper, magazines, anything I could get my hand of to fill up content for 4 hours. I would get to the studio by 5 o'clock in the morning, fully map out the show. And then from 6 to 10, be on live for 4 continuous hours with commercial breaks and music play in between. Then at 10 o'clock, we reset and get ready for the next day. And so I would sometimes be in the office till like 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. By the time I got home, I would pass out, take a nap, and then just get up and just enjoy my time with my family at that time. So as you can tell from that schedule, it doesn't give you a lot of time for getting out there and enjoying yourself and meeting other people. So, and I think this goes for a lot of media folks. I mean, luckily now, one of the positives about social media is that you can keep up with other folks. You don't have to be listening because if you're on the same time that they're on, you don't be able to know what they're doing. But because of social media, you'll be able to get an idea of what's going on in their world. So, no, there wasn't a lot of that. And I would say, I think that goes for most radio folks in the time that I was doing it. It was very competitive where it was like, it'd be like, a radio station would pull a prank on another radio station because they were competitive. But it came to a point where like all of that stuff went away because I think we all realized that, man, this radio business is really freaking hard and we shouldn't be making our lives harder between us. Let's just take the listeners we can have, steal what we can. But outside of that, just respect everyone in the business.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, well, that's good to know. I was very curious. There's been a lot of, what you say, interaction between old radio hosts and people from radio stations through podcasts of late, and a few rivalry beefs and things like that that have sprung up. So I wasn't aware. We were aware of who Howard Stern was mostly because of his Private Parts movie.
Yeah,
we didn't really get his radio show or any of the radio shows from America here in Australia at all. So we knew who he was, but we weren't probably aware of who the other people in that market were until YouTube. So there are a lot of their old shows are on YouTube. And when I mentioned a couple of people to my son, he said, "Oh, I watch those guys on YouTube." And I was like, "Well, I grew up in that era and I have no idea who they are."
That's
he said,
funny.
"Well, yeah," which was crazy. And since then, I listened to a couple of podcasts where the ex-employees of certain radio stations are having issues with each other.
Yeah.
So, and it's just a whole world that I didn't know about that I'm experiencing now through podcasts, which is very interesting. And I was just curious, were they like this with each other back in the day? But because they're pretty vicious now.
Yeah. Well, I think they're more apt to be vicious now, Darren, because the game has changed. I think we were, as radio folks, we were always joked that we were the last rung of the ladder of the entertainment world. It went movies, television, print, and then radio. So we were always pretty scrappy. We were the scrappy startup, and we always had that mentality of like, hey man, it's us against the world. And so we never really tried to shit on other people that much. I mean, you saw rivalries from towns like Stern. His big act was whenever his show was syndicated in a new city, he would go after the number one show in that town just to create controversy, because he was just great at creating marketing opportunities for himself and making a name for himself in a market who didn't know him at the time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's going after this other show. And then, within a year or two, he'd be number one. So that was the only time you ever saw like that stuff publicly. But really behind the scenes, radio is a very closeted community, especially when I was growing up in the 90s with it. It was just like, you would know like if so-and-so was in an extramarital affair or doing something like that, but it wasn't like social media was around to start talking shit about other people. It was just very much like it was like and unfortunately what it was too was an old boys club. It was all mostly men at the executive level, and then on air you'd have one woman in a group of 6 on a morning show or something like that. So there was that old boys network kind of feel where we were all kind of watching each other's back. So I think that's why a lot of that stuff didn't come to the forefront until like today, where now there's many more avenues to do something like that.
Okay. Look, while you were at the radio station, you obviously got to speak with some really big names like the ones I mentioned before. Of all the interviews that you did, what was probably your most memorable? Memorable for good or bad reasons? So it can be either.
Yeah, I mean, one that I always felt like really proud of, and it wasn't even really like an interview in the studio. It was me doing man on the street stuff. So when I first started with the morning show, I used to go out on the road, and I used to you go to movie premieres, go to events, and try to interview celebrities. And again, to remind you, low man on the totem pole. So it was always hard for the radio guy to get in front of like the TV crews or the magazine and newspaper crews. So many years ago, the U.S. women's soccer team had just won the World Cup. I think it was 1996. And they had won the World Cup, or it was 96, 98. But if you remember, this was the one where Brandi Chastain had ripped the jersey off of her after winning the World Cup. And then it was this world famous photo, like she was on the cover of Sports Illustrated with her jersey in her hand. And at the time, this was the 90s. So it wasn't 2022. So the idea of a woman stripping down to her sports bra for the world to see was a controversial topic. I know for folks under 40, they're like, what is this, the Amish times, or is this the Puritans? But there was controversy around it. And so Brandi Chastain just became a household name at the time. A week after winning the World Cup, after weeks of, conservative people kind of attacking her, people talking about how, I don't want to say offensive, but like how over the line it was for her to rip her jersey off in front of the world to see. I went to this event. By the way, New York was so in love with the women's soccer team. They did a ticker tape parade for them, which is rare. Okay. In New York, they would have ticker tape parades for the professional teams that had won titles. But this was such a big deal. They decided to do a ticker tape parade for the U.S. women's soccer team. And this is the team with Mia Hamm, if people remember, like the legendary soccer player from the U.S. But Brandon Chastain had the game-winning goal at the World Cup match. So after the event, after the parade, they all gathered at the Nike Town stores, big Nike store on 57th Street in Midtown Manhattan. And there was all like these little media scrums. So all the big players had a select group of journalists just peppering them with questions. So, the Mia Hamm section was like huge because she was just like the biggest star. And I worked my way over to the Brandi Chastain part of it. And so Brandi Chastain is sitting on a stool, just surrounded by dozens and dozens of reporters, all men mostly. And she just keeps getting hammered with these questions about the jersey and such. And me sitting there, I was like, well, there's got to be a question here about the jersey that's not about what she did wrong, but what it means to what she did, like the meaning behind what she did.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden, this question just popped in my head, and I go, Brandi, so much has been said about this jersey, but what are you going to feel in 2-3 years when you're walking around to a soccer pitch or down the street and you see a little girl wearing a Brandi Chastain jersey? And at the time, mind you, now you'll see women and even and obviously guys wear jerseys of celebrities, soccer stars, female soccer stars, basketball stars. It's pretty common. But back then, the idea of someone wearing a female athlete's jersey was just like incredibly foreign.
Yeah.
So she takes a second, and all of a sudden, she just starts bawling, like visibly crying in front of all of us. And we're like, what just happened? And she goes, I never thought about that in my entire life. I didn't think that was even possible. But just the idea of a girl having my name on the back of her jersey, it means everything.
Yeah.
And so everyone is then all of a sudden all these people start following up about the legacy and everything like that. And I remember the next day, the newspaper had actually in like the early, like second or third page of the New York tabloids, they all had this picture of her crying. Yeah. And in the article, it said, a guy with a microphone asked her about the jersey. So I was just a guy with a microphone, and I just remember that. But the reason I bring it up, and you asked me about like a famous interview or something, I've had thousands and thousands of interviews, Darren. But the ones that like stir an emotion in me and stir emotion in the guest, those to me will always be my favorite interviews. And that moment, it was one of those where not much research was involved. I was just kind of, what we talked about earlier, just riding the wave of like everything that was going on in this space of people peppering this poor young lady with like these negative questions. And I was like, what can I do here? What can I do here that's different? What can I do here that can change the temperature of this conversation and
make it feel better? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, circling back to sort of like my being in life is like, what can I do to make people feel better? And that's that. In this moment, that's what I was able to come up with, and I was just a guy with a microphone.
Fantastic. Look, I'd love to talk to you some more about some of the other interviews you've done, and we'll probably get to that when we talk about your book a little bit more. But I do get all my guests to come on and count down a list. It's part of what I do here. Now, you've chosen something very topical. It's very appropriate for this time of year, which is great, but it's also very topical, and there's going to be a lot of opinions on your choices. So you have chosen to count down the 5 best Christmas movies that are not Christmas movies. So, right. So this is going to be an interesting one because look, what criteria, what metric are we using to identify a non-Christmas movie or a Christmas movie, and then why it's not a Christmas movie?
Yeah. So this has been an argument for years, Darren, and I know you've seen it online, this sort of discourse about, movies like Die Hard or Gremlins or Lethal Weapon. And so the argument always has been is like, say, for example, Die Hard, is it a Christmas movie? And some people say yes, because it takes place at a Christmas party. And my argument to that always was, well, if to me, a Christmas movie is a Christmas movie where the entire thread line of the movie just rides on it being a Christmas movie. So these 5 films that I have in my top 5 that are the best Christmas movies that are not Christmas movies take place around the holidays or on Christmas Day. But if you were to take that element away from it, would not leave the movie lifeless or non-existent. So, for example, like Home Alone, if you take away the fact that the family went away for the holidays, well, then there's no movie there. And that he was left alone on Christmas. So these are movies that where if you were to take away the Christmas element, you would still be left with a great film. And so that's why these are 5 Christmas movies that are not Christmas movies.
Okay. I think you'll get a little bit of pushback from certain people on that. And I have this conversation with my son about one of your picks, every Christmas, but that's all right. Look, why don't we start off with your number 5 Christmas movie that is not a Christmas movie?
Okay, and before we get to that, Darren, I understand that there are some actors in this top 5 list that are problematic in 2022. I don't want to go there with this, but I want people to know that, yes, I'm aware that some of these actors on these lists are not people that are welcomed to make features anymore. Yes. But in the context of talking about their films, I'm always one of the things, Darren, that you've probably had this conversation about removing the artist from the controversy, or the art from the controversy. Yeah. So that's what we're going to do in this top 5.
Definitely.
And
I've already done that.
Number 5, I think, is one of those. So number 5 is Lethal Weapon, starring Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. The movie that revolutionized the buddy cop film. People don't realize. Yes. People take it for granted that now there's buddy cop movies or buddy movies, but that they basically put that genre on its head and just launched an incredible string of like the next decade or half of just movies about 2 guys arguing for 2 hours and then and then agreeing at the end. So Lethal Weapon takes place during the holidays. There's a few scenes that take place right around Christmas. There are some Christmas ornaments that get blown up and shot at during it. So that is my number 5 movie, best Christmas movie that's not a Christmas movie. What's your take on Lethal Weapon?
Look, I think that's a fair one. To be honest, the setting is at Christmas, obviously, and like you said, there's a hint of Christmas in the movie, but there are other movies on this list that have a more of a Christmas flavor to them, and visually they're more about Christmas than this one. And I think this one definitely, I would agree with you that Lethal Weapon is set at Christmas, but not a Christmas movie. And it's not even mentioned. Christmas is not even really mentioned that much, except for when they go over to Danny Glover's house and obviously the tree's up and things like that. But apart from that, Gary Busey getting belted on the front lawn with the ornaments around him. But apart from that, it's not a Christmas movie. I would agree with you on that one for sure, definitely.
Okay, number 4, there could be arguments for it, but it's Gremlins. And it's all about this young boy in the small town USA who receives a small creature for the holidays. And a Mogwai, yes, or Gizmo, as he comes to be known in the film. Yes. And so, again, not really a Christmas movie because it doesn't really have much of a Christmas spirit. It's pretty much the havoc that's wreaked because of this Christmas gift. Wonderful film. And it's so funny. Number 4 and number 3 on this list are these weird movies that would never be made today. Like, there's no way a Gremlins movie like this, so weird, with like drag gremlins, wearing lipstick and like just really, really odd things, which would not happen in 2022. It's a fun movie. It's a classic 80s sort of sci-fi horror movie where it's kind of scary, but not really. Just a really fun classic movie. Your kids are teens, right? Do they appreciate Gremlins?
Yes, they've seen it and they liked it. They thought it was good, but it takes a lot to shock teenagers nowadays. So they take it, on the chin when they watch it, and but they see it probably more of a kids movie. Now, whereas I enjoyed it as a teen. What was Gremlins? Gremlins is 84. Oh, great year for movies, and also the fact that you've picked movies all but one are in the 80s is testament to how good the 80s was as well.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Absolutely. I know Quentin Tarantino like shits on the 80s, says like the 80s was a really bad decade for filmmaking because of the fact that it became more about making money whereas opposed to making art. And yeah, I get that, those arguments. But there are so many good movies in the 80s. And number 3 is the example of an amazingly talented filmmaker making something that was mainstream, and that's Edward Scissorhands, starring Johnny Depp. Again, not going to get into that, but this is a wonderfully weird movie that has a very opens up with a very horror type feel about this boy that has no hands but has hands that are scissors, and the issues that come with having scissor hands. And it's just an amazing performance by Johnny Depp. Winona Ryder is wonderful as the female lead, and it just tells a story about people like embracing their weirdness. And I think it's such a great movie. It takes place during the holidays, parts of it. And just imagine trying to open a gift when your hands are scissors is kind of difficult. But yeah, just a wonderfully weird movie. And again, one of these that would probably not get made now. Now, if they made Edward Scissorhands now, Darren, it would probably be like a low budget indie that would that could have like a word of mouth. But this was an honest to goodness blockbuster film, like a huge movie. Again, I don't think can be replicated in the times we're living in now. But Edward Scissorhands comes in at number 3.
Look, Tim Burton is that kind of director, though. He's a little bit out there, and you see the way he attacked the Batman movies, and they were I really love the way he did Gotham in some of the Batman movies, and it hasn't been done the same way since. I would argue. I think he's an amazing director, and this is set at Christmas. He does a lot of Christmassy things in terms of when he sculpts a lot of the things into Christmassy type ornaments, and there's a lot of emotion around gift giving and acceptance. Look, yeah, it's not a Christmas movie. It's probably a little, like you said, it's probably a little bit too much of a dark feel to probably be classed as a Christmas movie, and although it could be a Christmas movie with a strange bent to it, which is pretty much what it was. But I want to just harken back to what you said about Gremlins. You think the Gremlins would get cancelled nowadays?
I don't think they'd be canceled, but I think they would come in a different form. Like, I don't think they would be as campy and as over the top as they. I honestly think if they did Gremlins today, the camp factor would be all gone. I think it would be more about the gross out kind of, maybe a little gore-ish and stuff like that. But I don't think you can't cancel Gizmo. I don't think you do that.
That would change the whole idea of the movie. I think the whole impact that it has. So
there is talk of them doing like a Gremlins 3, which they did do a Gremlins 2, which was not as well received, but it's actually a fine film. Yeah, the new batch. Yeah. You know your Gremlins. It was not as well received, but I think it's one of those movies that there's no such thing as them making an original movie anymore. So I have a feeling that you'll see something Gremlins, whether it's a streaming thing or a movie, in the pretty near future.
All right, we've done 3. Let's go on to number 2, please.
And number 2 is probably one of the greatest comedies ever filmed. It's called Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. It's wall to wall. Eddie Murphy at his best, Dan Aykroyd playing the best straight man, and Jamie Lee Curtis breakout performance. It's a wonderful comedy that part of it takes place during the holidays. Dan Aykroyd's character famously has a giant meltdown in a Santa Claus suit with a raw fish. That is pretty unforgettable. So again, not a Christmas movie, but it is based and happens around the holidays and the things that happen between the two characters. Trading Places, Eddie Murphy's kind of down on his luck guy, and Dan Aykroyd's rich guy who becomes a poor man. Just a great comedy, still holds up. It's one of those that will always run on your local cable channels, and even with the censoring is still freaking funny as all hell. And Trading Places is just a great movie that's not a Christmas movie, but takes place during Christmas.
See, this is where Number three, so Edward Scissorhands and Trading Places. I think this is where some of the arguments can be made that these are Christmas movies as well, purely because they're trying to evoke emotions from you in terms of putting you in someone else's shoes at that time of year, and maybe hopefully trying to engender some empathy towards maybe the less fortunate at this festive time.
Right.
So again, could be standalone movies that have a completely different setting, and it would probably be, still the same. So Edward Scissorhands didn't have to be at Christmas; it could be at some other time, and he could still do the same things that he does, but just with a different theme to it. And same with Trading Places. It's a very real movie, but because you have Dan Aykroyd changing from being a very privileged white person in high society, and then being down and out, and him coming to a realization of what that is like in terms of becoming one of the real people.
Yeah.
And Eddie Murphy going the other way, obviously. I think it's obviously trying to give you an idea of how the characters grow and empathize with something that they, up until then, didn't really understand. And look, you may be... I don't usually try and look too much into movies and go that deep. I like to, the suspension of disbelief and just enjoy them for what they are. But if there's a couple of movies that I think you could probably say that the motivation behind the movie, apart from just making a fantastic comedy or a thought-provoking movie like they did with those two, they're also trying to probably bring something out or give something to the audience. And that's the only point at where I'd say they could be viewed as maybe Christmas movies, because they're trying to engender that Christmas spirit. Or maybe just the spirit of man's inhumanity. Man's humanity to man.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And we kind of spoiled this one early, and I know this is a cliche fight. It happens every year, but I only had to put this as number one because of the fact that it's probably, and I actually did a double shot with it, but the original is probably the greatest action movie ever made. So the best Christmas movie of all time that is not a Christmas movie is Die Hard. And I've also included Die Hard 2, Die Harder as well in the mix, because of the idea they were both took place during the Christmas season.
Yeah.
But this is a big argument, Darren. I'm sure you've had it with your friends and you see it on social media. If Die Hard is a Christmas movie, it's not a Christmas movie, but it's just a great movie that takes place during Christmas. And I'm telling you, that movie changed. Again, going back to we hate to sound like the old guys, but the idea that Die Hard was such a game changer. First of all, Bruce Willis was a TV actor during the time where TV actors did not become movie stars. It was just like nowadays you'll see TV people do movies and go vice versa. Back then, movie actors would never slum down to be on the television, and TV stars just were never afforded the opportunity to be movies because they were just quote unquote TV people. That changed the game. And then the whole idea of what they call a log line of a film, guy on a blank doing this. Die Hard revolutionized this. So it was a guy trapped in a building against terrorists. This, from that point forward, when Die Hard 1 came out, there were probably 10 Die Hard ripoffs a year that took place where it was one guy against the world in fill in the blank, whether it was Keanu Reeves in Speed, whether it was Steven Seagal on a naval cruiser in Under Siege. There were so many of these type of films that were inspired and happened because of Die Hard.
Yeah. And look, I agree. I don't think it's a Christmas movie. And my eldest boy and I, this is the one that we have the arguments over. And it's funny because we have them every year and it's always the same, and neither of us will budge. But I agree. Look, that movie could, it could be, again, you wouldn't even have to set it with a theme in terms of what was going on, like, Thanksgiving or whatever. It could just be a good movie by itself. And there's not enough, I think, references outside of the party and the chaos in the airport and him having to come in and get the limo driver. And apart from that, there's not a lot of festive inclusions in the actual movie. So there's not a lot of, could you say, focus on
I will say all 5 of these films, though, Darren, they all in their soundtrack had a lot of Christmas music. Like even Die Hard, that like the score had basically very much a Christmassy sound in the background. So, and even, obviously movies like Trading Places and they all had like Christmas music featured in it. So it's not like these movies were just like, hey, this place takes place during Christmas. All right, we're moving on to the next thing.
And just ignoring it. Yeah.
they did create this sort of like Christmas vibe to parts of the film.
Yeah, and it'd be pretty bad directing if they did that, I dare say.
Yes, absolutely.
But something like Jingle All the Way, for example, that's a movie where you can't have that movie without Christmas.
Right.
So whereas any of these, like you said, you could have these movies still be great movies, but they don't have to be considered Christmas movies. So
correct.
Fantastic. So that's your 5. That's your top 5. I was going to keep number 1 until later, but to be honest, it wasn't going to be a big surprise for anyone. I don't think.
No, absolutely. We can't even mention it earlier. So it's like I would have tried to like moved it in a different part of the conversation, but the thing is. And to be honest with you, I would have moved it down in the list or put it up, but I just couldn't take away from the fact that it's just a great movie. And it's like, and it's the fight that we all have every holiday season. So for me to not make it number 1 would have been just really silly. It just would have been me just trying to make an argument for argument's sake. And I just didn't feel like it was necessary.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. So, all right, look, so considering we have done all 5 for you, I do want to speak to you a little bit more about your book if you've got some extra time that we can utilize. All right, great. Yeah. So, as we mentioned, number 1 new release on Amazon has done really well, critically acclaimed, and I've heard some of the podcasts that you've been on talking about your book, which have been fantastic. Now, I want to talk about some of the parts of the book. One in particular, you mentioned about having a fearless attitude. Now, from reading your book, that's a sort of attribute I think you've had for most of your life, and it's when you read about how you got into radio, you've taken opportunities whenever they've presented themselves and you've run with them. Is that part of what you talk about being fearless?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like you said, my career basically started because I was fearless enough to be like, hey, I don't need to go to college. I could just work in this radio station full time, and then what happens. So yeah, I think when it comes to conversations and communicating with people, interviewing folks, it harkens back to like what we talked about earlier. If you're able to develop camaraderie with people, treat them kind, be open, it allows you to be fearless. It allows you to take those steps of, man, if in any other circumstance, I probably would be uncomfortable to ask this question, but because I've created this sort of safe place that allows me to be fearless, I think that's where the magic happens. I talk about in the book about creating magic moments. They happen because you've created a safe place and then you're fearless. I don't think you can be fearless and then create the safe place, because if you come out firing with something that some people may consider an intrusive or even potentially rude question out of the box, first of all, you can't create the safe place. That place has been ruined. But because you've taken the steps to being thoughtful, researching people, knowing about them, making them feel comfortable, it allows you to be fearless. It's sort of like jumping out of a plane. For folks, most people like me wouldn't want to jump out of a plane, but people who are fearless jumping out of the plane are fearless because they've got a parachute. They wouldn't be fearless if they didn't have a parachute. Yeah. So in a way, doing all these things that we talk about and I write about in the book is you create all these things. That is your parachute. There's no way you're going to fall on your face and die as you would in a plane, but there's no way you're going to fall on your face or embarrass yourself because you've taken these steps, you've taken these precautions to make it so it works and that everyone feels good about themselves.
Has being fearless ever backfired? And when I asked that question, I am thinking of something I did read in the book about Taylor Swift in an interview there.
Well, yeah. Well, this is one of the perfect examples of not creating the perfect environment for a conversation and the safe space that I was mentioning. So yeah, so this Taylor Swift incident, it scarred me, Darren. I'll be honest. This is a rough sledding for me. I don't know if I'll be able to talk about it. No, I'm just kidding. So a few years ago, Taylor Swift was going to come into our studio to promote her latest album, and at the time, and now everyone does this regularly, when a celebrity comes into the radio studio, even though, as we know, it's an audio format, we would video record all these interviews and post them online. So people who didn't have a chance to listen to them while it was live on the air had a chance to catch up later on YouTube or on our social media channels to watch it. So for some reason, Taylor Swift's team had an odd request. Their request was, we can video record the first 5 minutes of the interview. And so immediately I got thinking, oh, so you mean we can only post 5 minutes? Oh, that makes sense. Well, that's fine. We'll only put, no. We will record 5 minutes and then stop. And so people ask me this when I share the story, and they're like, why do they do this? And I'm like, the only thing I could think of is that they just want to control the amount of content that's out in the world, and they don't trust people to just post X number of minutes. So they're like, hey, listen, we're doing you a favor, having the biggest star on the planet come to your little tiny little radio station, and these are the rules that we're going to have. And so, as you know, Darren, when it comes to interviews, the first 5 minutes usually suck. It's usually people feeling each other out. They're trying to get awkward. The vibe of each other, feel everybody out. Yeah. And so me as a radio professional was like, man, these first 5 minutes, it's going to be nothing. It's going to be like, hey, how you doing? What's it like being in New York? Blah, 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 blah. It's bullshit. So I got angry about it. And so the morning comes when Taylor Swift walks into our studio, and the publicist makes a beeline right to the videographer who's going to video record it. And the videographer was standing basically about a foot away from me, and Taylor Swift was about 4 feet away from me on the other side of the radio table. And so the publicist makes the beeline, taps the videographer on the shoulder and says, hey, by the way, just a reminder, when it gets to 5 minutes, I'm just going to tap you on the shoulder. I need you to put the camera down. And the videographer was well aware of the situation, was like, sure, fine, whatever. So we're about to go on with Taylor Swift, and I just had this rage building inside of me. I'm like, man, we have Taylor Swift on the planet, and we're not going to be able to do anything with it outside of interviewing her. So because I'm just thinking of all the other things that I should be worried about that I shouldn't be. Instead of me thinking about how can we make this a great interview? How can we make her feel comfortable? How can we make this so that it's just a wonderful experience for everyone? No, I was thinking like, oh man, I'm so pissed off at the fact that we're not going to be able to share this with our listeners on our video channels because of these rules that they've placed on us. So the publicist is standing next to me, and I go, oh, on that note, if we have a follow-up question at around the 5 minute mark, would we be able to continue recording? And the publicist was like, just trying to slough me off and be like, yeah, sure. I'm sure that's fine. And then I go, well, what if we have a follow-up question to that first follow-up question? Would we still continue to record the video? And the publicist at that point is starting to get confused and glassy-eyed. And she's like, yeah, I guess so. And because I can't leave well enough alone, I said, and what if we have a follow-up question to the follow-up question to that second follow-up question? Would we still be able to record? The publicist was just completely speechless at this point. But on the other side of the room, I hear this voice that says, well, somebody woke up feeling saucy this morning. It was Taylor Swift, who I thought was totally engaged on having whatever she was doing done, whether it was getting hair and makeup or talking to the other people on the morning show. She heard everything that was going on between me and her publicist. So because of that, during the entire interview, Darren, she was looking at me like with dagger eyes, as if she was expecting for me to say something offensive, over the line, and it just turned out to be a run-of-the-mill, average rock and roll radio interview where the person talks about their album and has their generic prepared answers ready to go. And it was all because I just put my ego first, and I was hurt that we weren't able to do what we normally do. And I didn't create the safe place. And again, this is an embarrassing story for me to tell, but the reason I tell it is because this is what happens when you don't put the interview or the guest first. When you put yourself first, and when you let your ego guide where the conversation's going to go, you're never going to be able to create any kind of magic moment or create a moment where you're going to be able to make everyone feel good and have everyone openly sharing ideas back and forth. And so even though this is a really stupid story that I tell, it's important to keep people in check and don't make it about yourself. When you have a guest, they are the word guest. You're supposed to make them feel welcome. You're supposed to make them feel comfortable. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to make them comfortable and you're not going to get anything out of that moment. And again, this is whether you're doing an interview or where you're having someone over or you're having a meaningful conversation with a business partner or a friend. If you're putting your ego first and want to get and just keying in on getting your points across, man, at that point, what's the point? Just talk to yourself. Go, go stream, go do a monologue, go talk to your phone.
Exactly.
But when it comes to having conversations, podcasts, or what have you, it's a dance. And if you don't have that partner, you're going to look silly dancing by yourself.
Well, look, and in making a safe space, I'll try to do that here, and I won't mention the Jets or anything like that as well.
Please don't. Well, actually, today you can. I think the last time we spoke, we weren't very confident about the Jets, but today I'm actually feeling pretty good about myself.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is pretty good. All right. Look, most of your book is about listening. Obviously, that's the most important part of a conversation, to have that conversation being meaningful between two people, because you're actually listening to what someone's saying. You can counter what they're saying or add to what they're saying. Mm-hmm. But you talk about listening practice. Isn't listening something we just do normally?
Nope.
What do you need to do to listen properly, and what can you do to practice listening?
No. So we hear. We don't listen. We hear things going on and they come one ear out the other, but we don't listen. And it probably has a lot to do with what we were talking about earlier about, this digital amnesia of us, just our attention spans have gone to shit. But I think it's really more about, I think a lot of it is the ego piece I was just talking about, Darren. I think we're so into our own heads and only care about what we think that we just don't care about what other people have to say. And, it goes in one ear out the other, as our mothers used to say. So I think in terms of practicing the listen, I don't think there's actual things it's not like a workout you can do. There's not like there's not some sort of app you can go to become a better listener. But what you can do, and I tell people this, is stay curious. If you're curious about other people, it will help you listen and be engaged. And I think that's a big problem nowadays. I think no one cares what other people think or have to say. So if you can keep that first, if you're like, man, I'm not a good listener. Well, here's the first step you do to be a better listener. Be curious about what people have to say. Don't worry about just what you have to say. Be curious about what other people say and feel and do. That will make you a better listener, because once you've engaged that sort of muscle, the curiosity muscle, if that's an actual thing, the listening is going to happen. Just because all of a sudden it's like you're watching a movie. You're like, oh, okay. So this person had this to say, but I wonder what's next? What's going to happen in Act 3 here? And so it's important to be curious. And I think that's one of the things that happens. And I think, as you say, as we get older, we get worse at it. When we're kids, we're so curious. We're always asking our parents, why do we do this? What's this? What's that all about? And then we get to a certain age where we're afraid to ask questions, or embarrassed to ask questions, or afraid to raise our hand. And I think that's just part of human nature. But staying curious and being curious, I think that's how you become a better listener.
Okay. Yeah, I have to agree 100% there. So I'm also interested in what you've just said about staying curious. Has that helped you with developing certain strategies, like there's PCM you were talking about in your book, preparation, concentration, and moderation? Has this been something that obviously they're applicable to any sort of a conversation, but very much so for podcasting, with the preparation and the moderation in terms of techniques to be a better podcaster as well as not just a better conversationalist? Would you say that they apply to that specifically?
Absolutely. And PCM you bring up in the book is, in my radio station at PLJ, our program director had a sign pinned up on the wall right next to the clock, and it said preparation, concentration, moderation. And those three words, as simple as they may sound, that is sort of the secret sauce to creating anything, period. So let's break those down. Preparation. When you're going to do something, when you have a conversation with someone, when you're going to do a project, you have to prepare. You have to know that thing inside out. So if you're doing a podcast interview, doing research, reading up on someone, it doesn't mean you have to write 100 questions, but knowing enough about that person or about the topic that you're going to discuss, that gives you a leg up on the conversation. So no matter what happens with the guest, whether the guest maybe is long-winded or maybe just gives really short answers, having that knowledge base going into it, that is what will fuel the conversation to become a conversation, as opposed to question, answer, or what you said earlier, waiting for the person to finish talking. Because now all of a sudden you have this base or breadth of knowledge that can help fuel the rest of the conversation. Second is concentration. Concentration is the big piece. And again, this is something we've been talking about. Being 100% focused in the moment about what you're doing, not looking at your phone, reading something else, being 100% committed. When I talk to my clients that I produce podcasts for, I go, listen, I'm going to do all the heavy lifting. I'm going to book the guests. I'm going to record the show. I'm going to edit the show. I'm going to produce the show. I'm going to make everything sound great. But the one thing I need from you is that one unadulterated hour of just you communicating with another human being. If you can't do that, then you can't do the podcast. You can't be a good podcaster. The best podcasters, interviewers in the world are not doing 6 different things. When Joe Rogan is doing a podcast, he's not doing anything but looking at his guest. When Jimmy Fallon or any of these late night talk show hosts are having a guest on, they're looking squarely at the guest. They're not doing anything else. That's concentration. And then moderation. Again, this sort of ties into the stuff we were talking about earlier. Moderation is taking your time and enjoying the moment. Those, being fearless we talked about and asking those tough questions. Moderation. Wait to ask those tough questions. Create that safe place. Make people feel comfortable. Then you can hammer people with tough questions or questions that maybe require a little more thought. So those 3 words, preparation, concentration, moderation, those work for just about anything you want to do in life. It helps definitely with podcasting, certainly, but it also helps with everything else. Whether if you have an important meeting with someone, think about it. If you have a meeting with your boss, preparation, concentration, moderation, man, that sounds like a pretty good formula for a good business meeting. Sales, preparation, concentration, moderation, man, all of that can work pretty well in any different scenario that you can think of.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing. I see a lot of shows, or I listen to a lot of shows nowadays where there's 1 or 2 of those things that are lacking. They've got the motivation to get on there and do a show, but preparation sometimes is sorely lacking, or they're not concentrating what they're doing, and especially if they have a guest. And like you said, I've seen some interviews on YouTube with people talking to other people, and while the guest is talking to them, they're checking their chat because it might be a live stream or something like that, and then they come back and ask a totally not like a non sequitur question, out of what the guest has just been saying, and it's rude. It's you've asked someone to be a guest on your show, you should be 100% invested. So I think they're words to live by, especially if you're considering going into podcasting, but if you just want to get ahead in life.
Yeah. And for podcasters, I say, and again, Darren, you know me well enough that I don't pretend to be an expert. That word gives me the heebie-jeebies, but I've done this long enough to have knowledge that I could share with people. And the one thing I tell for anyone who wants to get into podcasting, no matter what age, I'm producing podcasts for, boomers, Gen Xers, what have you. If you're starting a podcast out, avoid, if you can, doing a video podcast, because we get into our own heads. When you're on a Zoom call, Darren, who are you looking at most of all during that meeting? Yourself. You're not looking at the other person. I'm guilty of it. I'm looking, oh man, what's my hair look like today? What is that? Yeah. Am I getting wrinkles? And when you're trying to do a high level conversation on a podcast, when you have this interference of, what do I look like? Oh my God. Oh, what's the background look like? Oh, let me do that stupid thing where I put a blue screen behind me and it looks like I've got like a fireplace roaring, and like all that stuff is so stupid. Keep it simple. And if you have to use Zoom for your recording because you're trying to do a podcast on a budget, turn the cameras off. It will do you no good looking at other people. And I know many people who are conversation or communication experts will talk about the importance of body language. Yes, all of that is really important. Don't get me wrong. But if you're trying to create a really good piece of high level, high end podcast quality that is comparable to the best of the best, if you're worried about all that other stuff that goes with it, man, you're going to have trouble really pulling that off. So avoid trying to jump in, because I'm telling you, 9 out of 10 times when I take on new clients, they're like, oh, so is this video? I'm like, no, it's not. And like, why not? I'm like, you're not ready for it. You're just not ready for it. Especially if this is the first thing you're ever going to do, you are not ready for it. And so keep that in mind when you're starting a podcast. As cool as it is to look at the other people when you're doing it, more times than not, you're worrying about something else than the actual conversation.
So, considering that, with your Forbes Books podcast, do you use a purely audio format to record with?
Yeah, I use something called Clean Feed, and it's pretty popular in the podcast scene. It's not super expensive, but you get unlimited hours on it. And to me, I just enjoy it. I think it's really good quality because, I mean, first and foremost, you want good quality. All these interviews nowadays are being done remotely. So, and Zoom, sad to report, is not a podcast platform. People think, oh, okay, I'll just do this. It's not. It's not made for that. It's made to have low latency audio that's going to be, broadcast between people with very little lag. So it's not made for audio recording. I mean, obviously, when you're starting out and you don't want to invest a lot of money, Zoom's a pretty good way to go. But Clean Feed, I'm not doing an ad for Clean Feed, but it gives you great quality. It's audio only. You create a link for the guest, you shoot it off to them, and then you record the podcast and you download it and you get it in multiple tracks. So it's a really good platform. And to me, the amount of hours I'm doing podcasting, it's so much better to do with audio. And like I said, a lot of the people I deal with are mostly novice podcasters. So I want to make it as easy as possible for them to succeed in doing podcasts. You know, I don't pretend to be anything better or greater than anyone when it comes to podcasting. I know I'm just a regular guy. But the one thing that I know is that, listen, I'm curious about what other people are going through. I want to know what they've accomplished and how they've accomplished it. And not everyone has that sort of gene. And I have that. I mean, I don't know why, but that's why I love the audio medium. It just gives you this ability to talk with people. And, doing this podcast with you, Darren, I mean, I'm here just to listen to what you have to say and share your ideas as well. Because the one thing I tell people is never use the word interview when you're talking about doing a podcast interview. As funny as that sounds, I say shorthand. Yes, I'll set up this interview. But I always think about it as a conversation. I don't want it to be question, answer. There's bots that do that now. I think the Russians have it, that can do that for you. But to create a conversation, have people like relay ideas and feelings, that's what you want to do. And so I'll never be a master interviewer because I'm not going to be the one who's going to have like a super deep question about someone. But my questions are coming from the heart. Like they're questions that I want to have answered. And so that's why I was able to pull off the transition from going from the world of entertainment to the world of business, where, I remember one of my early podcasts I was doing this show with these two guys that created a SaaS program that helped healthcare facilities schedule infusion treatments.
Okay.
Man, Darren, I don't even know what the fuck that means. Pardon my French, but I was curious. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what is this all about? And I did recorded like 12 podcasts with these guys. I don't know anything about any of that stuff, but just the idea of me being curious and engaged, that's all you need. And the fact that I was doing the PCM, I was preparing for that interview. I was like, I wasn't taking a PhD level class on, infusion treatments, but just knowing enough is all you need, because you have to shine the spotlight on your guests. You have to let them shine. And then you can dip your head into that spotlight as well. But you can only do that if you're able to engage with these people on a level where you're equals. And, obviously, when it comes to brains, I'm nowhere near equals to these people that I have on these podcasts. But there's no one's going to out-passion me or out-curious me when it comes to having these conversations. And I think that's what people feel when they get done with me. It's funny, over the last couple of weeks, I've had two people mention that I use their name in the podcast. And they're like, it's funny that you kept using my name in the podcast. I'm like, really? And I don't even know I do that. But doing that makes the people feel good.
Oh, so it engages people for sure.
Yeah. And it's so funny. It's to me, it's again, it's one of these skills that I've acquired, but didn't realize that it actually had impact on people. But it's so funny. Two people in the last week have said that to me. It's oh, it's so cool that you said my name during it. And they're like, how do you do that? I'm like, I don't know. Isn't that your name? I just do it. So little things like that, I think, are what make people really good at communicating with others.
Very good. Well, Joe, see what I did there?
Yeah, slick.
Joe, there are a lot of anecdotes in your book that I'd love to get to, but I can't keep you here all day. specifically around Jennifer Aniston, and another one about Bon Jovi. And if you want to hear or you want to read about those anecdotes, you can go get Joe's book, and you can do so for yourself. But right now, I'm curious about Joe Pardavila, not the podcast host, not the radio veteran, but just the person. What are things that you do for fun? What are your hobbies? What are your interests?
So basically, I have a puppy who's a year old, and so my interests lie on just making sure that my puppy stays alive. He's a dachshund who weighs about 13 pounds. He's a long-haired dachshund.
Okay.
So pretty much my free time is keeping him entertained and making sure he doesn't piss all over my place. But yeah, so that's a big part of my life. And me and my wife we're super simple people. Like, we enjoy just going to the movies, and this is really weird coming from a straight white dude, but there's nothing I love more than a good like flea market or like a vendor or like a craft fair. So I'm a very simple dude. Again, I don't try. If you look at my social media handles, I'm not driving any fancy cars or living a really fancy lifestyle. I'm just a guy who just enjoys the simple things in life. Have a great wife. Have a great family back home in New Jersey, and for me, just being able to watch a Jets game on a Sunday or watch a good movie on a Friday night. That's all I need.
Ah, fantastic. And cutting the lawn in your Crocs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm still working on the lawn, Darren, because as I think I mentioned to you the last time, is I never owned a home before. I never had a lawn before. So the idea of having a lawn and mowing things is, man, it's something I was not prepared for, but I think I'm getting the hang of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it takes a little bit of attention as well, I guess.
Yeah.
So, that's good. You don't run or anything like that, or go to the gym, or
no? I thank you for. What are you trying to tell me, Darren?
No, you're looking fine. Very svelte. You're looking.
I'm just kidding.
Very fine.
I actually, and I'm going to do something that people that run marathons do. I ran 2 New York City marathons in a previous life. Yeah, so I ran them in 2003, 2005, something like that. So in a previous life, and I basically just did it out as a lark. I was getting into really good shape by going to the gym relentlessly. I was one of these idiots that would go to the gym like even if they had the flu. And I eventually said to myself, like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I killing myself at the gym? Like, let me do something about it. So I decided to go run a marathon. I ran the New York City Marathon twice, and it was just an amazing experience. And thank you for reminding me about hitting the gym. I really should, but the last year has been me concentrating on, working on these podcasts, writing the book, and then, building our new house. But I think I definitely do have to get to the gym. Although I am getting a lot of steps in, Darren, with this dog, because when I got Nathan, they said to me, "Oh, you need to just take him for a good, like 1 10-minute walk a day." Bullshit. This dog will walk for hours. So I'm getting plenty of steps in taking Nathan for his morning and evening walks.
Well, he's only got little legs, so he has to, it's he gets.
Well, yeah, that's what I thought too, Darren. I thought the tiny little legs, he would not need to go to long walks, but man, he'll go for like 45 minutes to an hour. I'll be coming back exhausted, and so so I am exercising a little bit, Darren.
Very good. Good to hear. All right. Look, last thing I'll ask you about before I thank you for coming on is Advantage Media. That's, well, let everybody know what that is, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the full name is Advantage Forbes Books, and what we are is a hybrid publishing firm. And in layman's terms, that basically means is we publish books for people who want to write books. The traditional publishing model is you have a publisher like a Random House or Schuster, whatever. They'll pay people in advance and then they'll publish their books. Well, only the 1% of the 1% have that opportunity. So what we do is give people who have always wanted to write a book, maybe they're a successful CEO or entrepreneur, and they want to share their story with the world, but maybe they're just not famous enough to get a publishing deal. So we will write the book for people, design the art, do everything soup to nuts that takes. So we're essentially like, we take the traditional publishing model, but make it in the hybrid sense, whereas we get paid to publish books for folks. So yeah, and that's what we do. And then the company started as strictly a publishing company, but as time went on, people who were writing these books were like, now I've got this book, what do I do next? So we added a marketing company to it, and then within the last couple of years, added podcasting that we give the opportunity for our authors to host their own podcast, and that's where I came in. And that's basically my day-to-day job is producing and co-hosting podcasts for all these entrepreneurs or CEOs who write books with us.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful job, and I'm sure you get up every morning enjoying going to work, considering your interests.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the fact that I don't have to wake up at 3:06 every morning, Darren, is that's a wonderful plus. Advantage. So it's great to have a job like that, and it's our office is hybrid, so I get to work from home 3 days a week. So I only have to go downtown Charleston a couple days. So it's a wonderful way to live. Like it was funny, Darren, when they first hired me, they were like, "Hey, listen, we're big on work-life balance," and I'm like, I didn't know what that meant. Like literally, like I came from a world of like my job was 24/7 worrying about the radio station. And my first day on the job, they had me interview someone. It was funny. Like my first day, I was already interviewing someone for a podcast, and I was like editing, and it was like almost 5:00, and I was like, let me just finish up the podcast. I got a few more minutes. So it was like 10 after 5, and lo and behold, I walk out of my little studio they have for me there, and the whole office is completely dark. They'd shut the lights off. Everybody had left by 10 after 5. And I was like, yeah, they really do care about work-life balance here. So it was great to come from a world where it was like my job was 24/7, completely engaged all the time, no matter what time of day, no matter what day of the week, about the radio show, to have a job where it's like, hey, man, I could give my brain a rest. Like, I could talk to dopes like you after hours, and then, I could just do my life, and then in the morning, get up, do some podcasts with folks, and call it a day.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, look, thank you very much for your time once again. It's been amazing as always. It's been great speaking to you. The book is Good Listen: Creating Memorable Conversations in Business and Life. If you'd like to let everyone know where they can follow all your work and get a hold of your book once again, and take it from there.
Yeah, so I'm on social media. Basically, I use Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and at all those handles, I'm at Joe Pardavila. And I'm very Googleable. I don't know if that's a word, but you can Google me and it'll come up. Yeah, it is now. And then Good Listen is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get books online. All the links are in my my profile. So if you want to just check it out, and if you want to just shoot me a message and have any kind of questions about what I do, or want some advice on podcasting, or just in communications in general, just feel free to shoot me up. Feel free to shoot me a note, and I'll be happy to get back to you.
Fantastic. All right, Joe, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Is it day or night?
It's evening now. It's evening. We started in the morning, and now it's late. This has been a long conversation, Darren.
Yeah. No, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you very much for making the time once again. I'm off to watch an ice hockey game, so I'll let you get to bed, and I'll catch up with you somewhere on the socials, I guess.
Absolutely.
In the future.
Yeah, I won't block you, Darren. It's all right.
Oh, well, okay. I appreciate that. Getting cancelled by one of my guests, that would be great. So, a shadow banned. So, look, mate, thank you very much. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon. So, it's not quite the end yet. In my rush to let Joe get back to what was left of the evening, I forgot to ask him what I'm hoping to be my signature and very on-brand final question. Namely, if you could be the VIP guest or on the guest list for anything, a concert, podcast, wedding, sporting event, talk show, etc., what would it be and why? Fortunately for me, Joe is very accommodating, and I reached out to him later and sent him the question, and he got back to me with this audio response.
Darren, it's funny. During the course of my career in radio in New York, I was very lucky and had the privilege to attend a lot of really cool events, whether I was invited or snuck into. But there was one that I never had a chance to go to, and it's one that has a real strong connection with my family, and it would be the Academy Awards. The Oscars has sort of lost their luster over time, but I just remember as a kid, there were two things we would always watch as a family. One was the World Cup every 4 years, and then every winter we would watch the Oscars together. My family and I were huge movie fans, and in the early 80s and even 90s, the only way to see these celebrities sort of out of their element were at award shows. And so the Oscars was the creme de la creme of all award shows, the biggest stars on the planet attended that event every single year. And so even though it's not as great as it used to be, and you hear about all the reports of its demise with the ratings in the toilet and everything like that, it still encapsulates like Hollywood royalty. We don't have royalty here in the United States, but that's about as close as it gets. Our movie stars are our royalty, and attending the Oscars would really be an amazing event to attend. I wouldn't like to be up in the balcony. I'd like to be somewhere down below so I could actually hear the conversations between all the celebrities and stuff like that. But yeah, if there was one event that I could be on the VIP list and get across the red carpet, it would be the Oscars.
That's it for the first interview show back. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Joe, and I hope I was able to create that safe place Joe referred to in his book. To that, I hope that you will go and check out his Forbes Books podcast and his amazing book, Good Listen. And I would encourage you to check out the Science of Sex podcast as well. It's very informative, eye-opening, and at times very funny. Maybe not one for the kids though. Don't forget to let me know what you thought of the show, and if you have time, please rate and review and tell someone about the show that you think might enjoy it. It's great to be back, and as usual, I'll chat at you again next episode.